So we'll talk for about, I think, 45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions from the audience as well, so just stick around. So just to start things off, actually, Sebastian, I was wondering, a big part of how we organized Critics Week was thinking very carefully about pairings of films, because we wanted each evening to generate a really productive discussion and a productive viewing experience. And you hadn't seen America before this.
No.
So I'm just curious what you thought of seeing these two films together.
I think America was an incredible experience, meaning, of course, they have parallelisms in relation to the understanding of politics and to in some way, I think the sensorial treatment of the material spaces, even if America is more metaphorical than Los Fantasmas, much more metaphorical, of course. But I was astounded by the control of the form that America had, and the level of the sound design was actually incredibly impressive in order to bring us into the different kind of sensations that she was trying to articulate. But I think I need a bit more conversation in order to pair them properly. I think we should open this to everyone also.
Or not pair them. That's a possibility too. Since Garrett isn't here, I should say the sound is done by Trevor Matheson, who's a member of the Black Audio Film Collective. And it truly is. I also think the sound design is really remarkable.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
But you kind of hit the nail on the head about why we were interested in watching these films together. In terms of control of the form, I think both films in their own ways struck us as really elegant experiences. And we had a lot of different questions about that particular elegance, and we'll get into that. But first of all, I was curious, when we were having dinner before this, you mentioned you really like Kelly Reichardt's films. And there was a recent interview where she said that one of her rules for her cinematographer is no beauty shots. So no shots that are beautiful for the sake of being beautiful. They have to serve the film or the story in some way. And I'm wondering if this is a tension. I know this is your first film. You've done DP work for other filmmakers. And is that a tension you experienced? Were there shots that you held a little longer because they were really pretty, or...
In relation to the idea of beauty, I think this is very important, and we were talking a bit about this before, but I think that to just pursue the generic concept of a beautiful shot or a beautiful image takes away specificity from whatever it is that the film is trying to create. And in the film, we tried, and it's very funny that you say this about Kelly Reichardt. I hadn't listened to this interview. One of the very few principles that we had with the cinematographer is we never going for the beautiful, but to finding an aesthetic that was specific to our film and that went in line with the ethics of where we place the camera, how we put the camera, how we use this hard light without exoticizing the spaces, but with the intention of dialoguing with them. So yeah, I think the idea of beauty has to be specific for each film, especially in a moment in history where we have so many production of audiovisual content, and there's let's say a homogenization of aesthetics. I think it's, for me at least, it was very important. I think I'm still in this process, and I hope I never get out of it, of finding my own way of creating a dialogue between the materiality of the world, my gaze as a director, and the relation with the people and the characters and the actors and non-actors that we have. And hopefully this extends to my work with the cinematographer in this case. Yeah.
You used the phrase homogenization of aesthetics, and it brings to my mind an essay that Dennis recently wrote for Film Comment called The Termite's Return, and he kind of was using this rubric that Manny Farber came up with, of the termite versus the white elephant. And Dennis, you said that even in the space of the festival film, the prestige film, you have these white elephant films now. And you mentioned two things. One, subject cinema, like films that come with pre-digested meanings. And the other thing you said was this homogenization encouraged by workshops and a certain kind of professionalization in film culture. And I'm wondering where sort of the aesthetics and the question of maybe a certain kind of generic formal elegance fits into that.
Yeah. I think it's really hard for me to be able to separate this question of beauty or elegance or aesthetics from everything else, which I think Sebastián already touched on. So I feel like, it's really hard to talk about aesthetics without also talking about ethics and politics, I think. And the essay that you mentioned was... Yeah, it was a bit of it was an attempt to sort of sum up the moment, which is obviously an impossible task, but it was also an attempt to express a certain frustration at this overwhelming sameness of the cultural landscape, and the sense of how what we see, what gets made is determined by certain forces that tend to homogenize things, that tend to expect a certain formula. And I'm not talking just about aesthetics here. I'm talking about the types of stories we expect from, especially the types of stories we expect from certain places that should look a certain way. And yeah, I think what you mentioned about subject cinema, I was actually referencing a term that Christian Petzold used, which I thought was very evocative, and he called this the lemon tree movie, and he said it was like, reminded him of a film that he claims to have seen, which was an Israeli film about like these star-crossed lovers, one from Israel, one from Palestine, and their love is symbolized by like a lemon tree that sits right on the Israel-Gaza border. And I think we can imagine, I think we've all seen films of that sort, right? So, and I think the festival world is sort of filled with that kind of film. But my objection to these films is not aesthetic necessarily. I think it's bigger than that.
But are there aesthetic tropes that you come across? I mean, is there such a thing as a film that kind of relies on its aesthetics in place of substance? As a curator, I mean.
I feel like, I don't know if this is where we're going with this thing, but I actually want to I would actually make a case for beauty. And for, as opposed to, because I actually feel like a lot of the tropes I see come from a suspicion or a fear of beauty, and a certain idea that naturalism, a certain kind of social realism, is maybe the best way to tell a certain kind of story. And this is why I think Sebastián's film is so interesting, that it doesn't fall into those tropes at all. And I think some of the more interesting filmmakers today actually are unafraid of beauty and actually see the potential, the political potential of working, with the beautiful. I think Pedro Costa is maybe the most obvious example who comes to mind, but I think there are many filmmakers. A film we saw today, Camila Restrepo's film, that's in the official selection, I think is a film that rejects the language of realism to work with a story that might otherwise have been told in a very predictable, formulaic way.
Did you want to?
Yeah. Just adding on this that Daniel was saying, I agree with this. That you're saying it's about creating a beauty that's specific, like talking about Pedro Costa that you're saying. Pedro Costa now, for me, I love Pedro Costa, but he has gotten to this space where his films are blindingly beautiful, but in a way that's so specific to Pedro Costa that it's unavoidable. Like you see a frame and you know in your bones that it's Pedro Costa articulating every single element, and not only the frame, the sound, the rhythm, the way that bodies move in space, and all of the elements of mise en scène. So yeah, I think this is the thing that Dennis It's talking about with like the politics of aesthetics and how can we create specific languages, or aim to create specific languages without a very basic rejection of the idea of beauty, but to harness this idea of beauty and making it specifically both in terms of the individual nature of, in this case, hopefully myself, and as a political statement again of what is the gaze that we are trying to articulate, I think.
I think maybe you guys are also coming towards a question that we were talking about earlier, is like, what even is beauty? What even is cinematic beauty? And Hélène, I'd love to turn to you for this one, because whenever people talk about the films that you shoot, people always call them so visceral and beautiful and gorgeous. But your approach is actually, it's a kind of beauty that's not aiming for perfection. You like the materiality of the image. You don't do too much color grading. You like there to be mistakes or imperfections. And so can you talk about your approach to beauty as a cinematographer?
Yeah, alors, I think that beauty and cinema, I don't like so much. First, it's mean, to be clear, when I see a film and when I see that it's beauty or beautiful or beauty picture, it's not my cup of tea. I think cinema, there is something else. We have to tell a story, we have to tell many things, but it's not, we don't go to see a film to see some beauty picture. For me, I think it has to be more invisible, and I think then the picture, we have to feel it, but not to see it. If we see the beauty of the picture, I think it's not good from my perspective. It means the picture has to be, of course, linked to the story. It has to be here with a point of view, with the light, of course, and with the frame, but in a very invisible way. Then we don't see it clearly, but we have to feel it. And step by step, we understand what is the meaning behind. So this is my own point of view since many times, since I beginning this job. And of course, I have to change for each film because it's linked with the wish of the director. And of course, what is very important, it's not to do some beauty picture, but it's try to create something. It's mean what the picture the director has in his mind, like a sort of dream, and how we can make it concrete. This is good, and this I can speak about elegance, but me beauty, I don't like this name for this job, of course. And also because in the real life, the beauty, there are some nice moments in the real life, but most of the time, not so much, so we have to change the real life. And we have to change it, not to make it nicer or more beautiful, but something perhaps that it could link to the story and the feeling that we try to tell with the film. Alors, so when you say that I like sometimes and it's roughly done, it's not true. It's mean sometimes I like when it's roughly done with some director, but sometimes also I like that it's very precise, but so precise and we can spend so many times for each scene, also in the grading. But of course, not too much, because if we do it too much, it will start to be visible and not invisible. It's mean I don't say that I like when it's roughly done. No, it's depend of the project. And it's depend of the director, of course, and the story, and the character, and the faces and we shoot, and in which country, if it's winter, summer, and everything. So, for me, clearly, beauty, I don't like when we say beauty and cinema.
But I am wondering if you think that there is value in beauty for beauty's sake. I mean, couldn't we also think of of cinema as a way to just contemplate beauty. If you think of really abstract art or image art, where there isn't necessarily such a narrative or a thematic through line, and so or such a strong, like, this idea of the director having a specific point to get across, and it's more experiments in aesthetics or experiments with the form.
Yes, I agree, but for example, if we see something beautiful in front of our eyes, it's okay, we see it with our eyes. In cinema, it's okay, but careful, because when we use a camera, when we use some lenses, when we use some filter, blah, 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 all the time we want to be over the beauty in front of us. We want to say, we are here, and let's see how nice is this lens, and let's see how nice is the depth of field, let's see how well I did my work, and let's see blah, blah, blah. So it's mean, of course, we can do a film with only beauty picture. For the director, he has to be a very good director, but it's okay. But it's mean, okay, but it's mean, it's good not to try to be too much with lenses, the camera, the filter also, because now we can do more and more. We can see that sometimes we shoot somebody and we have so many details in the skin tones, and we see it better than with our glasses now. It's mean we see some film, we see more in focus than in the real life. It's mean all the technique is over our head. I think that it's good that the technique is slightly behind us, and to try to manage to have the feeling of the point of view of our eyes of the storytelling. It's mean we can change the visual concept of the reality according to the script and to the feeling of what we want to tell. We have to change it, because the reality is not all the time nice. We have to change it, but in a way that we don't try to make it over with a beautiful light or with a beautiful frame, I think. And I think it's the same for when we see some reference of painters. The real nice painters, good painters, they didn't do something beauty, they did something else. And I think it's very important to stay in this line. Also when we are doing some film, we have to keep this in mind.
Can you say a little more about what you mean by something else?
I will say something perhaps more invisible. It's mean we change the reality when we shoot. It's mean because we have to first do a frame. It's mean first it's a choice. After we have to decide for the color. Even if we do any light, we have to decide for a color. We have to decide for the focus. We have to decide for the color of the dress. We have to decide about everything. It's mean, of course, we change the reality, but do we change it to make it more beautiful? Me, I'm not sure for the cinema, but we can try to bring up the feeling to be slightly more elegant. I will take an example. If we go outside all together and we will go to shoot something outside, I think it could be ugly. Yeah, because if we go closer on the faces with all the street light, it's ugly, or there is no choice. It means we have to do a choice. We have to decide to try to switch off this, perhaps this, and bring it here and here. This is a choice to try to make it slightly different. I will say elegant, also for the faces, elegant, but in the same way, not with a beauty concept.
So, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I think so. This idea of how much do you change reality? Like is there an obligation to kind of remove the ugliness of reality, or I guess it's like Sebastián was saying, it's sort of a question of specificity also. And I was reading some review of your film right before this, and it used the term poverty porn in relation to the film, not designating the film as such, but saying that it tread that line. Mm-hmm. And it's not a designation that I agree with, but it kind of loops back to what Dennis was saying also about there being this fear of stylization or aestheticization of certain kinds of images for fear of how they're consumed. And I'm wondering, you obviously are based in London, and I'm sure you think a lot about the consumption of films from certain parts of the world and other parts of the world. And is that a concern that weighed on your mind at any point, the idea of how maybe audiences at Western festivals would be looking at these images, some very abject images from Guatemala?
Yeah, there is always a danger, because films that come from where I come from and the south of the world, if you want, are very easily brought into this category, especially if we talk about making a film in a lower middle class urban context. But I think there's a difference in terms of the principles of the filmmaking that I feel like we were operating under, and the films that actually dialogue. I don't know if I like the denomination poverty porn, but that actually use the context in order to get a very simplistic emotional response out of an audience that's European, that historically has exoticized and made the mysterious out of these parts of the world. But I think, to be honest, that I think it comes to the filmmaker to question him or herself in order to do what both of you were saying in different ways. Where to put the camera, what is the relationship with the context itself, and to articulate the technical and formal elements that we have at our disposal as filmmakers in order to create a gaze that is actively and consciously not engaging with this pandering to some maybe European or Western audiences. I believe. I think for us it was an ethical responsibility almost to dialogue with the people that we made the film with in a completely different way in order to respect the film itself, and in order to gain much, hopefully, more depth than a simple transaction between a Western audience that will say, "Oh, look at how these people live," and that's it. The idea is to go much more beyond that and talk, of course, dialogue with history, with politics, with the sociological elements, but also go into the individual experience of these characters, and also the individual experience and the lack and the impossibility for connection that exists in a city like Guatemala City, and then making the formal choices and the structural choices in order to create a film that is not just, as Dennis was saying, like following a tradition of let's say ultra realist look at this context, but finding pockets of intimacy and contemplation in the midst of these plot elements that could dialogue with the problems that permeate our societies in this part of the world. So it was always a question of, where do I put the camera? How do we collaborate methodologically in order to not get to this point? Or not in order to not get to this point, but in order to make our film that is not this, hopefully. Yeah. And later maybe we can talk more about methodology, but I've already talked a lot, so we can go for someone else.
Well, I do have a follow-up, and I'm curious if there were particular directives that you had in mind, that your team had in mind in order to achieve that depth that you're talking about, or were there certain shots or scenes that were challenging to figure out how to frame for that reason? I mean, were there particular moments where you were scared that you were crossing the line?
To be honest, in pre-production, there's always this thought maybe lingering in your mind, but by the time we were shooting, things were working in a way where it was organic, and like this was never a motivator. Meaning, it is a principle that lies behind in the preparation and the research process, but by the time we are there, the language has been created and the dynamic has been created so that it becomes a creative choice instead of out of fear, let's say. Yeah, but I think most of the process came out of the methodological approach, meaning, as you can see in the film, it has moments that bridge with documentary and moments that are slightly like a slightly heightened sense of reality, like the hotel. So it was the methodology that allowed us to understand, or allowed me to understand, how to dialogue with the context. It was a fictional framework, meaning we had I wrote 9 pages of structural beats, but from the beginning the whole point was to dive into these spaces by meeting the people and bringing, if what I wrote was the bones, by bringing the meat out of the research process and actually creating relationships that were profound and not this like transactional level, I give you money and you do something. Yeah. So since I was so interested in the relationship between the material world and the camera, it was important for me to go and meet Koki, not in an audition as an actor, but to go and find a group of breakdancers in Guatemala that have a mix between small social capital and this performative element to them, and also this capability of seduction, maybe someone there. So it was getting to know them, then getting to know Koki, then and then putting the camera in front of him in order to see if there was a dialogue. But it was never coming to do an audition like, you're gonna show me how you rob someone. No, it was, I want to see if we can collaborate and create a character out of my own interior as a director and your own interior as a person. And that's why Koki is Koki in real life and is Koki in the film, but Koki is not a thief. But there are many elements of Koki, like his house, his mother, his son, that weren't written into the film, but that were incorporated as we were preparing after spending all this time together, let's say, and brought into this fictional framework, even if they are elements of his life. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, Dennis, if you wanted to elaborate more on this question that you brought up earlier, but not separating aesthetics from ethics.
Well, maybe this will be a way for us to talk about the title of the panel, because I'm curious to hear you say more about it, because for me, it's the idea of elegance. Well, first of all, I'm not sure how we distinguish between beauty and elegance, even though I think I understand, based on how Hélène is describing it, what she means in relation to her work. But like, you know, I'm not sure that what the distinction is between those two terms. They're both also very amorphous words, and I'm interested in this connection, this juxtaposition that you've drawn between the idea of elegance and the idea of the real, and to say unreal elegance is a proposition of sorts. Maybe the idea that elegance is not something that is found in reality necessarily, but added or created or fabricated in some way. I mean, you know, why could we have a panel that's called real elegance? Could we have a panel that's called real ugliness or unreal ugliness? You know, so I feel the idea of cinema's relationship to the real is obviously one that has, you know, it's a very fraught and a question that's animated many discussions, many theories over the years. So I'm just wondering how the question of the real factors into what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think you've turned the tables
Sorry.
on me.
I thought it would be productive.
No, it is. I was going to say, I think what you did there with like unpacking the title and proposing all these alternatives is exactly what we sort of wanted to happen, because even while, I mean, to some extent, coming up with titles for these things is just like throwing words until you find two that sound kind of good together. And then you hope that your panelists will fill in the blanks. But, you know, I think the idea was to take a stand and then imagine all the counter stances and to create something in the midst of all that. But also, one thing that when we were talking about both these films independently, a point of discussion was, you know, there were some people in our selection committee where both of these films were obviously very liked, but the one negative, or like, not even, I wouldn't say negative, like more tentative comment was, is this too smooth? Is this a bit too perfect? Does it seem like there is no sort of rupture here? Which is something we can debate. And the idea of the real is because I think both of these films are specific about political or social contexts. And the question that we were curious about is a certain kind of formal elegance, does that remove you from the reality being depicted? Does that create a sense of distance? Does that maybe soften the blow in the politics of these films? Or, as you were saying earlier, is beauty a form, is it being wielded as a form of politics as well? Yeah. And I don't think, we obviously don't have an answer for that, but I am genuinely interested in this question of beauty as distance or beauty as intimacy to the real. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alors, for me, of course, beauty gives a distance. As you could understand my answer.
Well, that's very definitive. What about you guys? Yes, no?
No, but at the same time, we can go back into Dennis was saying that about like the expectation of a European audience of feeling this rough, handheld, social realist, historical inheritance aesthetic coming from a third world country, if you want. And I think there's almost a fetishization of this kind of aesthetic in terms of how we expect films to be made in these latitudes. No, but I'm not contradicting you here.
But I think because you spoke about handheld, no?
Yeah.
But I think it's not a question of handheld.
No, definitely.
No.
I agree.
It can be handheld or it can be really with still frame. It's the same. It's I think it's not. It's for another debate, I think.
No, definitely.
But I see what Sebastian's saying as well. That is a classical aesthetic we think of, as not necessarily handheld. I mean, all these terms are very reductive, but if you think
I was
of,
just throwing like an example. But
and
it
a
goes
more direct aesthetic is one that's handheld and shaky and doesn't have as much technological intervention between the filmmaker and...
I don't know. I mean, it's also a style. It's also a language. It's also,
of course.
Yeah.
And there's this line that I think we're all referring to that is not only the handheld as an example that I put, but it's also the narrative structures, the tropes that we're hitting in every single way, from the sound, from the camera, from the lighting, from the narrative structure and the thematics that we're touching upon.
I mean, if I can take the discussion maybe in a slightly different direction and talk about America, the short that we saw. So I interviewed the director when that film had first premiered, and the film has a really rich context and backstory to it. The silent film that's sort of intercut is called Limekin Club Field Day. It was made in 1913 and then lost for about 100 years, rediscovered and restored in 2014 by the MoMA in New York. And sort of a historic film because it was directed by a Black Caribbean director, Burt Williams, with an interracial cast. And so the director took stills from that film and then also shot footage with various locals in New Orleans where she made the film, reenacting or creating basically filmic records of milestones in Black history or African American history that we don't have a visual
So
record.
these are images that do not otherwise exist?
No, yeah, she created them, except for the Burt Williams film.
Right.
But otherwise,
but everything recreated is
it's
not documented visually.
some of them, the later ones, but she's also, I mean, one of, for instance, the sequences with the white sheet, they stand in for the release of The Birth of the Nation. So it's kind of metaphorical also, and in some cases, the scenes with the baseball team mark the creation of the National Negro League. Mm-hmm. These are, early 1900s events. Mm-hmm. And so a question that I asked her was, someone who doesn't have access to press notes, who isn't going to stay for a Q&A, will they take away all this historical and political input from the film? And what will it exist for them as? Is it just a series of really beautiful images? And her answer was that ideas that linger in history tend to be images. People don't necessarily remember the contextual details, but images make an impression. So, we have been talking really about the visual, even though elegance or beauty is not limited to the visual, as Ellen was sort of gesturing at. But I am wondering, how much work do images do, in your opinion? What sort of, even on an individual level, what lingers, in your mind in terms of your viewing?
I think that's a beautiful thing about cinema, no? Like, when I think of Lucrecia Martel's La Ciénaga, what is stuck in my mind is the sound of the chairs being dragged in the pool. And to know that she built a cement thing around the pool just for this is an incredible thing to witness. Meaning the whole sensation of the film is summarized in these chairs being dragged, and within this, it's not even a sound, it's a sensation in my body. All of the politics lie behind, and the existential processes of these different characters. So I think this is the beautiful thing about filmmaking. We have all of these things at our disposal. So I don't think, as you said, that it's only about the image, it's about the relationship that we create. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a durational medium, and I feel like it is too easy to just talk about images when we talk about formal qualities or beauty or elegance, and I think what lingers with me can be an image, it can be a sound, it can also be like an entire turn in a narrative. It can be an entire like experience of time that the film induces in me. It can be how I feel it, as how I feel the passing of time is such a big part of cinema. I mean, that often is what lingers for me as much as an individual image or series of images.
Yeah.
And those things are, you could say, elegant or beautiful too.
Ellen?
Yes, I totally agree. It's not only image, it's a feeling of everything. It's something, sound, story, and image. Also, it's a mix of everything. And I totally agree when you speak about Lucrecia Martel. At this moment, it's very clear. Me also, I remember very precisely this moment, and it makes something. And of course, it's not only the image; it's everything. And I think this is it. Yeah, it's not only the image. Yeah.
But following also on the idea of time, I think that this is something that for me is incredibly important, like the articulation of space and time, because it's so specific to cinema. Mm-hmm. I remember we were talking about Simon Liang in the dinner, and I remember watching Viva l'Amor and getting to the end and seeing this long shot of this woman walking. And you go through this first stage and you're like, okay, she's emoting for the first time in the film. I feel sad. Then there's the second layer and you start wondering, why are we still... And then it breaks through, and the duration is what makes the whole film work. And for me, this was like this moment where I realized duration was this thing in cinema that had so many possibilities. And then you start looking at either Bellatar or Pedro Costa or the different people that use it in completely different ways. And even if it's fast cutting, we're thinking about the relationship between subject, space, and time. And for me, that is, one of the most defining attributes. Or if you see like A Brighter Summer Day by Edward Young, his structural articulation of temporality in order to do character progression goes so far beyond the 3-act structure that we think of in terms of constructing story. So, yeah.
I'm wondering if we can bring a different kind of word into this discussion, sort of related to elegance, but comfort or pleasure and discomfort and displeasure. I think a lot of times durational tactics that maybe make the most, impress upon us the most also have to do with the fact that they challenge our notions or experiences of time. When you talk about Martel, a lot of her sonic devices linger with you because they can be unpleasant and they can be really disorienting. Elegance is maybe a really broad word, but if you bring it down to the experience of the viewer, I guess, can pleasantness be somewhat reactionary?
Reactionary to, like, pleasantness reactionary to what? Or unpleasantness reactionary?
Pleasantness in the sense of if a film is sort of too pleasing to watch or to listen or to experience, like I was saying earlier, does that soften the blow of the film, of its politics in some way? And is a certain level of discomfort in the viewing experience necessary to engage with it more intimately or to, take it with you for longer?
I think it's really hard to to answer these questions because they are very broad, and I understand the usefulness of thinking through some of these questions. But for me, pleasantness just is not interesting. I guess like that's to me is even worse than beauty for beauty's sake. I think. I mean, I dislike nothing more than a film I forget, or it's just like why bother? And I feel like this is probably more of a problem with this lingua franca that I was talking about, of a certain kind of acceptable art film language. Yeah. These are like films that are designed not to be too disruptive in the viewing experience, not to anything. They occupy a very comfortable middle ground. They're not going to be too beautiful. They're not going to be too rough. They're just right there. And I feel like that is the worst for me. Like that is a tendency to like the middle in every regard. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I would much rather be discomfited or seduced by beauty than just put in this sort of middle, this nondescript, pleasant middle space.
And is it, I know these are kind of very abstract questions, but do you think it's possible to anticipate that effect in the making of the film? Is it possible to anticipate what is too much, what is just enough, what is anodyne?
I don't know if in the making of a film, probably experienced filmmakers can. Like there's a certain amount of tropes that you can follow, and if you're technically proficient, you may be able to hit them to make like a formulaic art film, let's say, because I do agree with what Dennis was saying. But I think the word disruptive is very good, meaning if we think of duration is disruptive for most cinema goers because we're used to understanding time in a very specific way, especially right now because things are getting faster and faster and faster and faster. So I do think that disrupting through the use and understanding of time at the beginning might be challenging, but if we do it in order to, again, I go back to specificity, with the specific intention of the film of changing our perception of temporality, I think it changes our perception of the whole way that we experience watching a film. So I think this kind of disruptiveness, for me at least, is necessary in what I'm interested in doing, let's say. Not for the sake of making people uncomfortable for the sakes of this, but I do think that there are different ways of making and watching films, and most of the time we're stuck in this homogeneous space. Yeah.
And I think questions of beauty and elegance only get us so far, you know, when we talk about what's exciting even visually, right? I mean, sometimes what's really exciting to us visually is those terms don't apply, right? It's not like whether they're beautiful or ugly, and I think there are different ways maybe to think about. One example is, like, for me, is a film that I've come back to a lot over the last few years, is a film called The Human Surge by Eduardo Williams, which I think is a really exciting, interesting film, like in narratively, visually, and formally in many ways. And that's not a beautiful or elegant film in any conventional sense. You know, it's like the camera work is deliberately sloppy. It's very underlit in parts, you know, and there's a certain it's not a kind of like a cliched roughness either. So there's something about the images that like compel you. You know, I think any kind of image that makes you as a viewer more alert is, to me, like a good image. That's a positive. So, and that can be a beautiful image. It can also be an ugly one. So.
But I think that it's very important also, because we speak about film. It's there is some things that we have to think about. It's the story and the script, because a film, it's not only some picture like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's a story, and its director, and even now, and even more now than before, its director he start to do a film just with a script. And he follows the script. After he can change, of course, but first there is a script and the story, and after everything else follows. There is nothing else. All the aesthetic and the elegance or everything has to follow. The first thing, it's what we say and what we tell. And when you said that, of course, the director, he knows after, step by step, even when he's doing the film with the crew, where he goes, because he knows exactly with the story, with his character, with what he wants to say, if he can feel if he is in the good line or not. And when he starts to be more director than did already some film, he understands, he feel it. And if sometimes he doesn't know, there are people around. He's not alone in the desert. Some people are speaking with him. I will say, yes, he knows in which direction the film will go in a aesthetic way. When I say he knows, I can say she knows. I say director, but it's a male or female, of course.
But I do think also, there are films in which everything only serves the story, and there's no real intentionality behind the formal choices, and there's sort of a subordination of the aesthetics of the film to just functionalism, just moving the story forward. And then, Dennis, you were saying, these terms like beauty and elegance maybe don't apply when we watch a film, but also in criticism, like a trope, an overused sort of term is stunning visuals, or
Yeah, do you really, as a critic, like using the word beautiful is, it's pretty lame, right?
Right.
It's like it doesn't actually, it's not descriptive in any meaningful way, right? So like you usually don't use these words.
Yeah, and they are very overused.
Yeah.
So did you want to interject?
Yeah, I would like to say that before to start to shoot, we know where we will go. We know not only me and the director, but everybody, because it's linked with the money, it's linked with the size of the crew, it's linked with how many light, how many, and which sort of lenses, how many times we have to do it, if we do it cutting the sun or not, if we do it fake night or fake day. Everybody is concerned from the beginning, because it's a question of money, and everything has to be decided before. Of course, after, when we shoot, there is a part of invisible things, and it will happen, and that's why it's very important to have this feeling during the shooting and to keep the eyes open, but everything it's already decided before. If you shoot with two people or 6 people in the light crew, it will be a different film. The same if you have grip or not, if you have small location or big location, if you shoot, you see what I mean, huh? Everything has to be decided before, also because there is only one thing that we have to think about, it's the money. And it's very important now, huh? When we do a film, it's the money. After, of course, there is some invisible things, but it means all the concept is shared before. Also with the time that we have. And it's very important to tell it because we speak about like this in an abstractly way, but before to do a film, the director, he knows which sort of film he will do and which sort of film he will be able to do according of the time, the budget, and the number of days he will get, and the choice of the crew he will choose. Is it a small crew, or is it a middle one, or is it a very big one?
Yeah. No, I agree on most of the parts, but I think this is a very good bridge into a part that I'm very excited. But I think this has to do exactly with methodology. You know, like the fact that you have to, filmmaking is not this thing that we can just go into a room and, like, of course, writing has incredible value. Not that but
thank you for that.
No, meaning, but the logistical implications.
Writing has no value in the market.
All the value in the world. No, but in terms of the logistical implications of filmmaking, regardless of what kind of film, it's just immense. But at the same time, I think that there can be different ways of making films, and I think that is very, very exciting. For example, you can have Hong Sang-soo, who has a relationship with the town and tells them to the different locations, like, hey, I might shoot in your place, but I'm not going to tell you when, but you have to be ready. And these are different deals that you make, of course. And then he writes the dialogues for the actors on that same day, on the morning, and they have to learn it. And his crew is medium, and he always works with the same people, so they know how. Or Pedro Costa, who goes for years by himself and 2 other people and spends either 2 weeks on a shot or 3 shots in 1 day, and it goes at the rhythm of. Or we have again Sai, who uses a document that's like 15 pages, but it's full of notes and not a. But what I mean, I think what we share is the rigor of knowing what kind of film we want to make before making it, and the responsibility of the director of bringing the whole crew into the methodological aspect that will inevitably inform the aesthetics of the film and the ethics of how we produce a film. So yeah.
No, I think this is a really great addition to the conversation. I mean, the question of funding and contingencies, the various contingencies that also affect filmmaking, you know, in terms of light, natural light, and locations. Yeah. And I think a part of why this discussion is both very interesting and hard is beauty is like so ungraspable and personal. And the introduction of production logistics, it does bring in, you know, this interesting question. You know, all of us know some extremely expensive films, you know, specifically certain kinds of Hollywood films which have a lot of money behind them now, which are absolutely unpleasant to look at, you know, and they're not remarkable or pretty in any way. And then you also, some of the directors you mentioned who work on very tight budgets. Ellen, you were telling us earlier about working on a project where the budget required you to move from film to digital, and who still achieve what we would probably unanimously call beauty. But I'm wondering, like, in your experiences, have there been particular negotiations where you had a vision of how you want to shoot a scene or how you want to bring a particular scene to life, but you had to scale it down because of these methodological, you know, constraints, and figure out how to still maybe capture what you wanted to capture with that image?
Alors, I will say, for me, it's happened many times. It's mean we dream about something, we ask for some things and we will like to have,
Yeah.
and of course somebody say no. And usually, most of the time, it's no. So me, I use now to ask slightly more, like this. I know that I will try to get something. But yes, it's been we dream about something, and it's no. But I will say that sometimes it could be good. I will give an example. When I don't know if you saw Beach Rats from Eliza Hittman, and all the nights on the beach are very, very dark, and it's a specific way to lit this moment. In fact, when we did a prep, we went like this, and of course it's totally night. We have to see them, and we thought perhaps we could have a cherry picker for a moon, even if it's a small cherry picker with a very small moon, but to see something and blah, 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 blah. But of course it was very difficult to go in. It was not so well permitted, and it was really difficult because it has to be to the opposite side. It means all the time to have this small, stupid, fake moon in a small cherry picker, so too small all the time in the frame. So, and the line producer say no, it's impossible. Okay, so how to do? It means it's totally night. We shoot in Super 16. So how to do it? And step by step, and this is the truth because Eliza, she could do the same, say the same. It's mean we said, okay, we have to find another way, and we found another way. A sort of frontal light like this. We did some tests, and it became the style of Beach Rats. But at the beginning, we wanted something else. And me, I wanted to have a moon effect. But impossible to have a moon effect. It was too expensive, and it was no. It's been all the time it's happened like this. Also because it's too expensive, we will need too much line, a big light, a bigger crew. So it was no. It's good also than when it's no, you have to think, and to try to find something else. And if you work with a director who is not afraid, it's okay. It's even if we do a mistake, even if it's too dark, it's okay. It's our choice. Mm-hmm. And to do a film, we have to do choice. It's if it's still frame, if we pan, if we track, if it's handheld, whatever, but we have to do a choice. And this sort of choice make a style, an aesthetism, an elegance in the real or unreal, I don't know. But it's voilà, this is it. And it's like like it is. Voilà.
I always like sort of going from these questions, very critical and abstract questions, to questions about the actual making of the film, because then it makes the abstract questions look so foolish, because we're meeting the film at the other end of this process that went into it, and we're just kind of projecting these questions onto it, but there are such real material conditions in which these images are produced. Sebastián, did you have any such moments or negotiations?
We just shot a film in Turkey, and in Turkey, as a director of photography, yes, to be honest, because you're always trying to negotiate with let's say I wanted control over a space. Is a much smaller film than Beach Rats, and by the way, the moonlight was one of the best things about Beach Rats, especially when he's coming to meet the guy between the plants, the front moonlight that you have that's moving with him. That's really good. But it's a choice. It's an aesthetic choice, even if it came from that. We were commenting with the producer Remy Tani when we were watching the film. This is a great, interesting choice that's counterintuitive with the nature of the film, because it's a very, if you want, like experimental moonlight for a film that doesn't have other moments like this, but it works really well. But going back, I needed the control of a space in order to light it and shoot it in the way that we wanted. The director wanted a lot of control with tracks and whatnot, and we couldn't get it as much as we wanted, and we had to adapt, of course. But I think that is this material circumstances that, if you are able to dialogue with them, end up creating the aesthetic of a film. And in our case, in Los Fantasmas, to be honest, this is the way I wanted to shoot the film. The only thing I would have done if I had more money is pay people more, because everyone was amazing, you know. But if I had more money, that's what we would have done. But in terms of the way to work, of creating, of not working transactionally, in terms of I give you money and you give me something, of having to create relationships and going to the places multiple times and becoming close in certain way with the different people, from the extras to the locations to the actors and gaining access to an intimacy that I had to respect. All of this process is the way that I wish I would have done it, even now in retrospective, because it was a way of me also understanding the way I wanted to work and that I want to work. So things came out of that as a learning process, and also things were successful. The things that are successful because of this approach, I think. And I think it was pivotal to do it in this way. So negotiations are happening all the time, in every single way, but in a macro sense, I didn't have anything that I think of now that I say I wish I would have had, but the film was built in relation to the specific nature of the film that we were going to shoot in the places that we were going to shoot it. Yeah, I just wish I could have paid everyone much more.
That makes sense. So we'll go to the audience now, but before that, I wanted to pose one last question to the three of you. Accepting the idea that beauty and beautiful are empty words that we can fill with whatever we want, I want to know, what is the first association that you make when we say beautiful cinema? I mean, who's the director or film which instinctively to you fits that label? I mean, we've already talked about some names, but just to get a sense of how we maybe all think of this word differently and individually. Instinctively, not after contemplation.
I'll go last.
I think you should go first. We just saw your film. Come on.
To be honest, it's not just one. It's moments in films that I feel are beautiful, but because they remain inside of me in a way that I think of a sensorial way. Mm-hmm. When I think of this beauty, if we want, and then it brings me back to all the either philosophical, political, or aesthetic connotations of the film. But as an example, as I put the Lucrezia's chairs, these bodies being cut, and the chairs, Tarkovsky's water, Simon Liang's water, you know, like this elements, like Pedro Costa's structure, like the structure of in Vanda's room, like the cyclical structure of destruction is something that I find beautiful, even if it's a counterintuitive use of the word, or Antonioni's following of his main character in L'Eclisse. Like there are these things that are embedded in me that are not this one single thing, and these are different kinds of, or this cut. There's like how someone can cut from here to here, like in A Pigeon Sat on a Branch Reflecting on Existence by Roy Anderson. It has a cut that just compacts time and like contextualizes past and present, and it brings the film. So I have no one film or one director. Yeah.
I think that one reason this is so hard to answer is because if we call something beautiful, we are also maybe implying that there's something frivolous to it. There's a certain it almost seems like a dismissive term, is my sense of it. To say something is, it's almost like we're saying it's all merely beautiful. There's a certain association with emptiness, maybe, or slickness, and also the language of capitalism, of advertising, is associated with that, of these overwhelmingly polished images. And I think that maybe that's why it's hard to answer, because I feel like I think a filmmaker, I feel like I'm not doing their work justice if I call it just beautiful. But then I think this feeds into this larger, another reason why it's been hard to have this conversation, I think, is because of this I think beauty is also one of the things that is hard to talk about these days. And there is an interesting text by Elaine Scarry called "On Beauty and Being Just," which she wrote maybe 15 years ago, where she talks about like just the fear and the suspicion of like how we can't talk about beauty anymore. And she makes an argument for it and says that beauty is related to truth and to justice, which is of course something that goes back centuries to Plato. I think it's crazily ambitious for us to tackle this question here that philosophers have not been able to answer for centuries, by the way. I think I don't think we really, partly because the terms are vague, partly because the terms have been evacuated of meaning, partly because they mean different things to different people. But yeah, what do we mean when we say beautiful? Sorry to take us full circle and
No, I think that was a very substantial and eloquent dodge of my question. Well played. But also, I mean, I do completely see your point. I mean, there's also these notions of beauty being something
but everything
ineffable.
Sebastian said, I also.
Okay.
All his out.
Dennis is throwing everything he has at this question. Ellen, did you want to attempt or?
If we speak about some reference like this, of course, for me, the aestheticism of the Cienaga, for me, it was very important because there is something aesthetic and also with the story, and it's very well done and it's very linked. And I will not say that it's there is no beauty. It's really also the way to shoot. When we see again the film, for example, it's a very simple way of shooting, and it works perfectly. For example, to speak about something that it was slightly more stylish but very good for me, it's this film Y tu mamá también. It's when we feel it's very simple like this, but we feel the movement, we feel the image, there is some backlight, there is some movement also around the cars and everything, but in fact it works very well. It's slightly more, it's here, it's mean we feel than the point of view, it's slightly different than the story. There is some movement and we see it, but it works perfectly, and also because the story it's super good. And after, if there is another film for me, then it's already one step further. It was Happy Together. Because in Happy Together, it's very simple, but suddenly, clack, there is a choice. They go into the room, it's totally yellowish. Why yellow? It's yellow. And it's so surprising that at this moment, they touch something, they go out of the reality, but I'm sure if you saw Happy Together, everybody remembers this moment of this yellow room. It means they put yellow gels on and I think this is a way to go out of the story slightly above, but in a way that it was very delicate. Not too much, but just like this. And I think that it was super good.
Great. Thank you for answering that question. No shade at anyone. Anyone from the audience want to enter this conversation? Okay, we have a couple people over there. The microphone is coming.
Thank you. I have a question for Sebastián. It's not about critique of judgment. It's a very simple question. It's about the beginning of the film. Yeah. You have this scene where he's painting the Westler is painting his face, and I guess that we can agree that is this what he does is kind of elegant. But after this paint job is destroyed, and we discover another kind of pleasure in a way of destroying this mask that was so kindly made. So I wonder if for you as a filmmaker, those are two different pleasures, two different kind of elegances, and or if they are the same.
I think without going into the elegance again, no, but in terms of the pleasure, it's interesting because working with Carlos is actually a wrestler by trade. He's not an actor. He is actually Punisher every weekend on this arena. So this is his character, and this is actually what moves Carlos's emotional life in real life. So for me, this was this incredibly valuable thing that this stoic man, because he is this in this way in real life, could have this moment of vulnerability, but only in front of this limited amount of crowd and in this precarious state. But there was so much commitment to his alter ego, who is the Punisher. So for me, it was very important to portray the, as you said, the pleasure of converting himself into what he believes is his real self. And this is why the only moment of where Carlos emotes in the whole film is the moment where he is in the middle of this action, of the wrestling, of the pleasure of being hurt and hurting, but for the performatic element of being loved or hated by the audience. So it's more about being seen, acknowledged, whether it is about the hate or the love. It's about this pocket of agency that's real, that's concrete, and that's material in this moment. And that's why this is the only moment where we see Carlos actually engage with any kind of emotional state in the whole film, at least from his very stoic exterior. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
There was another question right there.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the films. I have a question, I guess, regarding your discussion on beauty and film. I was wondering about the relationship between like growing bureaucratization in film, and how does that play into your discussion about like the emptiness of beauty, and how much work? How does that relate to your work? How much time do you spend doing bureaucratic things, or hiring people that do what some people call bullshit jobs, that don't really tick in boxes, things like this? And how do you keep that away from your movie making? Or what creeps in, let's say, yeah.
To be honest, this is our first experience, and I say our because we had a very tight crew of people that have been working before, but we had been making shorts, we had been making other films, but for the pre-production and production of the film, because of the nature we've been talking, of the methodology, and also of the fact that we all went to the same film school, and then everyone came and paid their tickets, and then in Guatemala you can actually create this kind of production model that Remy created according to the way I wanted to directing, which is again not about throwing money but creating relationships. We were able to, by a lot of savings and going into debt, be able to pay production for the film, so we didn't have to deal with any of these bureaucratic processes in order to make the film. That's why it's what it needed to be, regardless whether it's perfect or imperfect, which is not perfect, definitely imperfect, but at least up until that point, we didn't also know the world of the festival, of the getting fundings or whatnot, at least in a profound way, yeah? So it wasn't until we had to go into work in progresses that we started going into this world, let's say, and we were lucky to find people that recognize the film as what it was. Again, not because it was this masterpiece or what, but an honest attempt of making a specific film. And through this, we were fortunate in having the right persons notice the film as we went along. But yeah, this funding thing of finding money for the film is something that we are starting to know now because we're in development for the next projects. But from direct experience, I still can't tell you what it is to navigate deep in this world of the bureaucratic nature of making films that are of this kind, let's say.
Anyone else? Last chance. There you go.
You talked a little bit about the distancing mechanisms of elegance, and I wanted to touch upon another side that you mentioned a little bit, the aura of the real. How important is it for your work to think about something that comes out of a materiality of something that you observe and then that you use for the cinematic qualities?
I actually want to add something to that question that came to my mind, is also the idea of using maybe you were talking about compositing real people with made up characters and using aestheticization as a way of signaling the reality of the movie too. I mean, is it a way of also signaling that this is not an ethnographic portrayal, using certain kind of devices that we tend to not associate with documentary filmmaking or ethnographic filmmaking. So
yeah, I think the relationship with the material world is, I think, one of the most important things for me as a filmmaker, regardless of whether it's this film or the materiality in film is something that I think grounds any work, whether it's, again, Tarkovsky doing a film that has nothing to do with a community in Stalker, with an existing community, or Pedro Costa living in Imbanda's room for ages. Like, both of them have a different relationship with materiality, but both of them are incredibly anchored in this sensation of a real world and a real tangible reality. But in terms of the dialogue between documentary and fiction, I think and it wasn't my intention to signal when we were in a documentary world or in a fictional world. I think that there are great films that actually do this, like Miguel Gomez with Our Beloved Month of August or whatnot. But the idea was to create a hybridization between both strategies in a way that it was almost imperceptible, so that we had this feeling in moments that we were watching something that it was very real, but it's still within the fictional framework. It's to erase. The idea would be to erase the line and get the spectator into a stage in which he or she is not asking the question of what's real and what is not, in which both dance together, because I believe both are real. Yeah.
There's a question here, and then I think we're probably gonna.
It's a question on a lighter note concerning beauty. I saw a very nice Letterboxd review of your film where somebody says, giving it an extra half star because it was so easy to lose myself in the beauty of the main character's face. And so maybe can you reflect a little bit on beauty and actors, because it is true he has a very remarkable presence. So you already talked about finding him and sharing time together, but how about the beauty of the actors?
That's a very important question. I think that beauty in actors is a disease. Wait for me. Wait. Not because people can't be beautiful, of course, or whatever, like the Western canons of beauty are, but because throughout the history of filmmaking, we've used beautiful people or pretty people on screen in order to just bring others in a very direct transactional way. But from the beginning, in the making of Koki's character, I wanted someone that had some qualities. He had to have a small amount of social capital. He had to have a very palpable capability for seduction, and he had to feel incredibly comfortable in his own body, because the film deals with his body. So I needed Koki's character needed to be a handsome man that was then destroyed, because the whole process of identity of Koki, the way that he can weaponize this charisma and this capability for seduction, when his face goes, he is eliminated. So I needed Koki to be staggeringly, if not, like I didn't look for him for his beauty, but give this aura of magnetism, even if he was pretty or not. And Koki ended up being a very handsome man, which was even better because it was his face that was destroyed. So by the time that this happened, we feel as if his whole identity was taken away from him. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully we feel that.
All right. Last question.
It's also about one scene in your film where Koki is with his son in the park. Is there a reason why the scene hasn't been subtitled? Or no subtitles?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll repeat it. She's asking if there's a reason why the scene with Koki and his son in the park wasn't subtitled. And the reason is because the son is at an age that he doesn't speak well, so he's just making sounds that sound like words, and Koki's just saying yes and no. So the subtitles would be yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, 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 because the kid is not actually speaking. So this is why. And I felt like the importance is the sensation and the relationship much more than... And also it just would be confusing if you just see a lot of yes and no's on the screen, to be honest. But that I struggled on that. At that point, it's weird that it's not subtitled, but it's not about what they're saying, because at the end of the day, the kid is saying nothing. Yeah.
That's a note we can end on, saying nothing. Right. Well, thank you so much for engaging with me in this discussion, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.